The following is an original production of AZPM News.
For Arizona Public Media, I'm Erika Hamden, professor of astrophysics at the University of Arizona, and this is Arizona Science. Joining me today is Michael Robinson, senior conservation advocate at the Center for Biological Diversity. Michael's work focuses on the protection and recovery of top predators like Mexican gray wolves and jaguars. Welcome, Michael.
Hi, Erika. Glad to be here.
I first wanted to check in with you about the Mexican gray wolf populations in southern Arizona and in the Southwest, because I know that they were originally, it was a very small population as, recently as 1998, and they've bounced back in a big way. So first I want to ask, what makes Mexican gray wolves special? Why should we care about them?
Mexican gray wolves are a unique subspecies of the much more widely distributed gray wolf. They're adapted to our arid climate and hotter climate, and specifically to prey that's not necessarily found in other areas. The javelina, for example, or collared peccary, and they're outside of the range of the larger prey animals that wolves further north specialize on, including moose, caribou, and the like. They do prey on elk and mule deer and white-tailed deer as well, but they are different genetically and in appearance from other gray wolves. They're part of the balance of nature, very important part of the balance of nature in all kinds of respects that keep other animals helping to make them thrive as well.
Yeah, I've read about wolves being reintroduced in national parks and things in kind of more like the Rocky Mountain West, and the huge impact that they have, and what makes wolves such a key part of an ecosystem.
Being at the top of the food chain, so to speak, they play an inordinate role in the evolution and the behaviors of animals that are both their prey, but also other animals that are influenced by the animals that are their prey, and even plants. Survival of the fittest is a concept that is familiar to most of us, whereby the animals that have the genes that enable them either to escape a predator, or it's the predator themselves, the genes that enable them to be more effective at capturing and killing prey that they need to survive and to raise their young. But beyond that, the fact that wolves make elk move around more has meant that the willows and cottonwoods that, for example, in Yellowstone National Park, were very heavily browsed in certain stream sides, got a respite after wolf reintroduction in the northern Rocky Mountains. And those cottonwoods, for example, have matured into big trees that provide habitat for migratory songbirds and that provide the building material for beavers that further change the landscape. But one of the things that's important to understand is that natural ecosystems are not only more complex than we've been able to elucidate at present, but they may be more complex than we're able to conceive of. And that deserves more of an attitude of respect and even awe on our part to keep things functioning the way they evolved. And we can still do that with the Mexican wolf, but they're really in dire danger, notwithstanding that their numbers have increased.
So what originally happened to them to cause the population to decline by so much?
When settlers from a European background came into the West and the Southwest specifically, there were no game limits, and perhaps equally as important, there were no norms around the killing of wildlife. People are familiar with the mass killing of the bison, the buffalo herds that were killed by the thousands and ultimately by the millions and eradicated from the Great Plains and elsewhere in the West. But the same thing happened to elk, which were entirely exterminated from Arizona and New Mexico. The native elk that were here, they later had to be reintroduced. Domestic livestock, cattle, sheep, horses, goats, pigs even were brought on to the open range, and wolves and other carnivores had to eat something. They switched from the animals they had evolved to eat for so many millennia that were no longer on the landscape in any meaningful numbers, and they started preying very heavily on livestock. The ranchers naturally were trying to make a living in difficult circumstances and saw that this is an unaffordable aspect of the Western landscape. And they tried all kinds of things to eradicate the wolves. Ultimately, it was through marshaling the forces of government that the livestock industry succeeded in eradicating wolves from the Western landscape. Ultimately, 3 wolves were successfully captured and bred. And then there were 4 other wolves in 2 lineages that had been captured in previous decades and captured and bred as curiosities more than anything else. Their descendants of those 4 were bred with the descendants of those last 3 that were captured for a total founding population of a captive population that was later the seed source, a total of just 7 animals.
Do you have an estimate of how many wolves are out in the wild now?
There's an annual census that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service conducts, and their latest count is 317 wolves in Arizona and New Mexico. In Mexico, there's approximately 36 wolves from the reintroduction that began there in 2011, but there are 0 radio-collared wolves in Mexico, and therefore the number 36 is very much an approximation.
What do you think, given all of the challenges of having started from such a small population, like what do you think the long-term outlook is for the population as a whole?
If nothing changes, the long-term outlook is extinction due to the loss of genetic material, even after those last 7 survivors were bred. The captive population has the equivalent of 2.86 founders, which is still, got to say, it's catastrophically low, but it's 36% more than the 2.08, or I believe it was, I'd cited a moment ago for the wild population. So that 36% additional genetic diversity has to be successfully introgressed into the wild population for it to survive. That's necessary, but not sufficient. What they've got to do is resume the releases of captive-born, genetically valuable family packs, well-bonded male-female pairs with their pups. When they released them up through 2006, from 1998 through 2006, they had a 2/3 survival and subsequent successful reproduction and raising pups rate, 2/3. They stopped doing that because it was successful, and the livestock industry protested that there were too many wolves there. So they stopped releasing family packs. After the genetic diversity crashed to the levels, close to the levels it's at now, they started resuming releases from captivity, but they did it in a means that maximizes mortality. They took newborn, and they're still doing this, taking newborn pups from their parents in captivity away from their parents and releasing them into the dens of extant wild wolf packs. And almost 80% of them disappear shortly afterwards,
Because
never to be seen again.
They're not able to integrate into the pack in a successful way.
They're not living.
Yeah.
They don't live. They die. It's a terrible loss for these individual wolves, and you can only imagine what the wolf families and the wolf mothers are feeling when their pups are taken from them. And there's absolutely no reason the parents should not be released with their pups and get to that very high survival and rate that was happening beforehand. But the Fish and Wildlife Service likes it because it looks like they're doing something, even though what they're doing is actually not appreciably increasing genetic diversity. And it turns out it works well for the livestock industry, which is behind all of this damage in the first place. It turns out the ranchers aren't opposed to all wolves. They're only opposed to live wolves. They have no problem with wolves that are released and subsequently die.
I'm really curious to know how you got interested in these like top predators, and specifically the Mexican gray wolves. Like, did you have an encounter at some point in the past, or like where did your kind of love of them come from?
Well, I've been working on gray wolf recovery for a long time, for decades, but I've also been working on recovery of other endangered species. And my interest is both fascination with the biology of wolves and fascination with the animals themselves. Obviously, they're social animals, they're intelligent. And I think it's important for all of us to realize that everything in nature has an important role to play, and we should let our empathies go out as widely as possible, and we should feel empowered to speak up for endangered and other wildlife.
This is Erika Hamden, and you've been listening to Arizona Science. We've been talking with Michael Robinson, who studies top predators like Mexican gray wolves. You can hear more of this conversation and others on our Arizona Science segments by going to azpm.org/Arizona Science.
This has been an original production of AZPM News.